YouTube, this is Meta Mario, and I wanted to talk today about Aggron and its place in the meta. So we're going to go over basically all of its stats. We're going to look at it compared to other steel types. We're going to look at its counters as a raid boss. We're going to look at its usefulness versus other Pokemon, and then finally I'm going to give you my analysis on whether or not this is somebody you want to go and farm. Okay, so let's take a look at the top steel types, what their stats are, and how Aggron sits in this meta. So if we're looking at hit points, Aggron's kind of, he's right there with everybody else. Everybody's in the 140 to 160 range. He's kind of at the bottom of that range. But we're comparing him to Metagross, to Steelix, to Registeel, and to Scizor. Even though Scizor is a bug type, it does get dual steel movesets, and it's got a pretty high attack, so I threw him in the mix there. If you look at attack, Metagross, clear winner. He's the best attacker, followed by Scizor. Looking at defense, this is where Aggron shines. He's the second best behind Steelix at 314 versus 333. All of this put together kind of makes him a bit more of a defender than an attacker, but right now he's currently the best steel type you can get. If we look at total stats, Metagross has 664 versus Aggron 652, so they're close, but it's more about the distribution and the fact that Metagross has way more points in attack than Aggron. If we look at CP, he's second highest CP, coming in at 3004 for a perfect at level 40. The best quick moves he can get are Iron Tail and Heavy Slam with 16.4 and 33.3 DPS respectively. However, Metagross has a weaker quick move, but a much more powerful charge move with Flash Cannon at 44.4 DPS. So I threw together this slide just to give you a visual of how those stats measure up. So let's take a look at the stat breakdown. Metagross is probably the most well-rounded. Most of his stats are right around the same area. Aggron, crazy defense, right? Second only to Steelix. Attack, definitely Metagross with Scizor as number 2. And then hit points, they're all pretty much the same, with Aggron being pretty low on the list hit point wise. Again, he's not going to be your best attacker, but if you're looking at him versus Scizor or him versus Steelix, he's going to be a little bit harder hitter than those two guys. Okay, so here's a visual of Aggron versus Metagross. Metagross will probably be coming out in the next, I don't know, anywhere from the next week to month. Really just depends on what Niantic decides to do. Looking at his stats, he maxes out at 3637 versus 3004 for Aggron. His attack is 11th highest with 257 versus Aggron's 198 attack, putting him at 47th place. Not very good, right? Defensively, however, Aggron is 5th highest ranked with 314 defense versus the 247 that Metagross has. Stamina, they're about the same. Only a 20-point difference separates the two. The difference here that we want to look at finally is just the movesets. Iron Tail Heavy Slam is going to be your best option. Iron Tail Stone Edge, there are better Stone Edge users out there. Golem, right? So that's who you're going to focus on if you want a rock type. But as a steel type with Iron Tail and Heavy Slam, he's going to be pretty decent. Metagross, on the other hand, with Bullet Punch and Flash Cannon, is going to be the MVP. Okay, so now that we know Aggron's place in the meta, let's look at him as a raid boss. The counters are pretty much always going to be the same top 3, right? You want to use either your fighting with Machamp or Hariyama, or in sunny weather you want to use Groudon. Against a dual steel type, Groudon is going to edge out the fighting types, but for the most part, you're going to go in with your fighting types in pretty much just about every battle. Okay, so a perfect Aggron, unweather boosted is 1716, weather boosted is 2145. And their ranges go from 1695 to 1760 for the unboosted versus 2118 to 2145 for the weather boosted. This infographic came from uh, PokeBattler, so feel free to go and check them out. In fact, most of my data comes from there. Uh, Fantastic website. I highly recommend them. Subscribe to their Patreon. It's well worth it. So in general, steel types are most effective against ice, rock, and fairy. Against ice and rock, there are better counters. You're going to want to go with either your fire types or your water types. But against fairy, steel type is the best. So that's really where he's going to shine. In fact, if you look at PokeBattler's simulations, the only time that Aggron is going to start showing up high on the list is against Gardevoir. The flip side is steel types do very little damage against water, electric, and other steel types, so you really don't want to use them in any of those matchups. Finally, I'm going to skip the section about poison and all the other stuff there, but if we look down at the bottom where it's talking about the super effective types to use against steel types, as we saw in the previous slide, it really comes down to fighting and ground. Fire doesn't really play a role just because the fighting guys are really doing way more damage, as well as the ground guys in sunny weather. So, you know, so what does this mean for Aggron? Use him against Fairy. To take him out, use fighting and ground. Alright, so my final thoughts. Overall, he's the second best steel type in the game. Unfortunately, he is heavily eclipsed as an attacker by Metagross. And he'll probably be more useful as a defender than anything else. Although I don't think, he's definitely not going to replace your Blissey, Chansey, Snorlax, the Blisslax combo. But if there's already, say, a Dragonite in there and you don't really know what to throw in, he would be a good choice. That is, if you actually want to hold the gym for more than 24 hours. If you don't care, then just throw him in there so that you can get candy to unlock your final Metagross. So he's going to be most useful against fairy types, as we said before. So if Gardevoir, for example, ever ends up being a raid boss, that would be a great place to use Aggron, at least to fill out your team of Metagross. That said, if you do manage to catch some wild weather boosted ones in the level 30 to 35 range, that's where I would focus. I personally am not going to spend any Stardust or candy on raid bosses unless it's a perfect. Even then, I'd be hard pressed to spend the candy on something that at best is going to be a B or a C tier. Unlock him for your Pokedex, maybe collect one or two, but other than that, Aggron is just more of a fun Pokemon. He looks really cool. I mean, I think Swagtip said he's a dinosaur with armor. So, yeah, I thought that was pretty funny. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you haven't already, click like and subscribe. If you haven't checked out PokeBattler, go to their website. That's where I grab most of my data. And have a good one. Thank you.